Hello and welcome to The Two Trees. I'm your host, John Dillon, and I am here with Miss Carey. You're going to hear from her in a moment from the Genesis Marks the Spot page. Carey, go ahead and take a minute and say hello to everybody.
Hi. Thanks, John, for inviting me here, even if you had to be guilted into it, prodded.
Listen, I had a
Joshua
note page
Sherman.
of things that I'm doing, and on that page is Connect with Carey and talk with
All
you
right.
about what's going on. Josh he likes to stir the pot. I've learned about this guy.
He does. You know, we need people like that.
Yeah, and I heard his interview on your podcast. I've not finished it yet. I'm about three-fourths of the way, and you guys are fun. I was really enjoying. They're talking about the image of God, and if you think you know what that is, I would encourage you to listen to it. And if you don't think you know what that is, you definitely need to listen to it. Because it's a really important concept throughout Scripture. But we won't take all the time here to do that. Let me introduce to you just who we are as a podcast. We are the Two Trees, and we're here to talk about angels and demons, ghosts, the pagan gods, and the weird corners of the Bible. We're here to talk about the beliefs of the ancient world, the way that they talked about the supernatural world, all to help you understand the people and the text of Scripture. We hope to help you engage in a deeper level with the text. But more important than anything, we're here to show you Jesus as Deuteronomy 10:17 describes him. The Lord your God is the God of gods, the Lord of lords, mighty and awesome. So, Carey, you started your podcast almost to the day when we started ours. And so I kind of consider us like,
weeks later.
Either cousins or brothers or sisters at this point. I'm like, we have the same birthday just about. And so
Pretty
whether
much,
you realize it or not, you are on our family page of cool people that we know that we're proud to associate with. So why don't you just talk a little bit, introduce yourself, and what made you start a podcast, and what made you jump into this whole divine counsel stuff?
That is an excellent question, because I had no intention of doing anything like this for a long time. But I run the podcast Genesis Marks the Spot, and I'm a moderator at the Divine Counsel Worldview Facebook page as well. I'm a graduate of Dr. Heiser's courses at his Awakening School. And through those courses, I got wind of the opportunity of getting my master's degree at Redemption Seminary. So I went on and did that. And I got my master's of biblical studies. And through there, so Redemption does a really interesting thing. It's a great program, because instead of being in a class with 20 or 100 other people, you actually get to do the work yourself and then meet one-on-one with a mentor professor. So I was going through all of these courses, and I was having such a great time. And one of my but here's the other thing about my going into Redemption. I had no idea why I was doing it. I was just like, this is what I need to do. I have no idea why. I don't know what my direction is. And everybody asked me, well, don't you go to seminary to be a pastor? Don't you go to school in order to do something afterwards? And I said, yes, but I don't know what that is. And I'm sure God will have something for me. Mm-hmm. And so when I was, one of my favorite professors was talking to me and said, well, what do you want to do? And what is your direction? I said, well, I want to teach, and I want to be able to communicate with a lot of people, but I don't know how to do that from where I am. My situation is very steeped in, basically I live in the middle of Mormon country. So there's a lot of Christians around, but there's a lot of Mormons around, and it's this really strange mix of people, and there's not a whole lot of opportunity for somebody like me to teach. And so I do what I can, and I have certain outlets here, but it's very small, and which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that kind of thing. But I felt like there needed to be more for me, and so my mentor professor said, well, why don't you start a podcast? And I said, because nobody wants to hear my voice, because I'm not comfortable talking to people. Apparently it's not true. But I wasn't comfortable going into Redemption talking to people like just off the cuff, or talking about what I was passionate about, just being able to just go off on it, until I got into redemption, and I had to do that because in my work I had to present it to my mentor professors. So I actually quickly got the hang of just being comfortable in my own skin, being able to talk, being able to just present information. And so as I kept going through, I said, okay, I kept going back to this idea, I have to do a podcast. No, I don't want to do a podcast. And I have a wonderful group of Christian friends who, when I brought this up to them, they said, well, that's a great idea. What's your problem? I said, oh, okay, maybe it's not as bad of an idea as I thought. So here I am, and I am loving every minute of it.
Well, we're loving every minute of it too. Carey's podcast is solid content, guys. You get the impression that you sat down and wrote this awesome research paper, and you're just kind of chatting about it with well, I feel like you're talking about it with me because I'm the only one that listens on my earphones, and so it's right up my alley. And I know I'm not the only person out here who loves that kind of thing. So if you're interested, and you should be, go check it out. If you're not interested, go check it out anyway, because you might get interested once you're giving it a listen.
Right.
No, and that's similar to our story. You know, me and Jacob and the guys here, we're all in ministry, and we do a 1,000 different, methods of teaching and trying new things. And we just kind of took a gamble on this. We talked about it and threw it out there, and God just really blessed it. And it was kind of weird because we have no idea what we're doing. We still have almost no idea what we're doing. Like, we can turn the board on and off easier than we could at the beginning. But
right.
but in general, it's just kind of like we're flying by the seat of our pants and hoping that this is blessing somebody out there. And it's fun. I really enjoy it.
It is fun. Yeah.
It's stuff that, you write a sermon, or you're teaching a Sunday school class or something like that, and there's always this pressure to stay on point, move through the curriculum or get, and so you don't get the opportunity to really just chase around in the weeds as long as you want. And with a podcast, like, that's what they want you to do. They're like, all right, don't give me the stuff I can get, on a typical Sunday morning someplace. It's the ability to talk about the stuff that doesn't make it into the actual presentation. And I think a lot of people appreciate that. And it's the side issues, even like when you and Josh were talking, and spoiler alert, if you haven't listened to it yet, you need to. But I love just how you hit like that Romans text or a couple different places, and you're like, now this isn't normally what you would talk about if you read this part of it, but we're going to talk about it because we can, and I like that. And and so we're kind of in a process here, Carey. We're talking about ghosts, and in particular, we had somebody come up to us who was experiencing some weird stuff, and that happens more often than you'd think it does as a pastor. And my tradition was pretty much, you just didn't talk about stuff like that, or you just you laughed those people away. And we had no training of any kind with anything like that. And I have my personal convictions. I kind of talked about them in our episode, about ghosts that just released because we can. And so somebody asked us, as a Christian, what should we think about that? And they asked us specifically about this text in 1 Samuel, about when the witch of Endor calls up Samuel. And this person was told, it's obviously a demon pretending to be Samuel. And they went and read it, and they're like, and I can't figure out why they think that. And so I went and read it, and I can't figure out why they think that either, other than that that's the party line. And so we've done a couple episodes about the background here, but tonight, if it's all right with you, we'll just kind of read this text together and talk about the stuff that looks interesting. And if we don't finish the text, that's okay. We'll do it another time. But just to spend some time in the Word and looking through the pages of Scripture is always fun, at least for me. So
yeah, definitely.
We're looking at a group of people, just to give the background here. Saul, who is a fine, strapping specimen of a human being, head and shoulders above everybody else, but he really isn't a great king. he's incredibly selfish. He's incredibly self-centered, and he's violent. I mean, he's mean about stuff. He's wiped out the priesthood at a place called Nob. He's hunted David from place to place, and he has straight up disobeyed God over and over and over again. And this is really the last little window of his story. God has more or less shut off communication with Saul, and Saul is afraid because his country has been invaded by a group of people called the Philistines. And we know not as much as we wish we did about the Philistines. They're connected to the Sea Peoples, and they're mysterious all on their own. Carey, have you done much reading about the Sea Peoples?
A little bit, but they are very mysterious, and it's really frustrating because there's all of these things that people want to say, oh, this is the Philistines and this is the Philistines, but they're just guessing fundamentally. Most of what we have about the Philistines is in the Bible. So,
which is, it's fine for me, but I want more. I want lots of information. Right. I want archaeological digs. I want great tombs that have been excavated with the more sparkly treasure involved. That would be better. But we don't really get that. There has been a recent find of a pretty large Philistine cemetery that's being excavated as we speak, and so I have high hopes for that. But when we think of a country like the Philistines, we typically think of it as existing in like extended borders like we would see on one of our modern maps. And that just really isn't the case in the ancient world. You had city-states, like this city was loyal to this place and this one to that. And so the Philistine cities are mostly on the coast, but there are other Philistine cities in the heartland of Israel. And one of them is really close to a place called Gilboa. And when Saul is killed, he's taken to Bethshan, and that's where these Philistines seem to have come from. But the Philistines are connected to the giants, the Anakim, to Goliath, and there's all kinds of weird, warfare between God and these demonic powers, if you want to think of them that way, or of fallen gods who are at war with the Lord, or spirits who are presenting themselves as powers and are one day going to be humbled before the Lord. And so you would think after the whole Goliath thing that Philistines were just done. And that's not the case at all. They stuck around a long time. And so we're looking at a guy called Saul, and he wants to talk to Samuel. And Samuel is the last of the judges. There's this really great book called Judges, full of action and sword fights and mystery and assassins. It's a wild, wild ride. And the last guy there is Samuel. And he's dead at this point. He's passed away. And I guess Saul feels kind of rudderless. He doesn't have his direct connection to God. And at this point, there really isn't a prophet in Israel, is there?
I don't think so. But do you know what's interesting? As I was looking at all of this, I didn't really realize previously reading this in previous readings, but Saul is very directly connected to being a prophet himself.
Oh, yeah.
And that's like, and so when he's not able to get any word from God, he's doubly freaked out. Like, wait a second, I'm supposed to be, and that's probably part of why he's not, is because of his attitude.
And how bad is it that Saul is your best chance to get a word from the Lord? I mean, he's just not a great guy. When you hear the word prophet, though, there's a text in Jeremiah here that I want to look at. Dr. Heiser brought it up in one of his lectures, and it kind of fascinated me. Just as what comes to mind when you hear the word prophet? Is I know you come from out there in Mormon country, and you may have a little bit of a different understanding of that than some people living here.
Oh yeah, definitely. Because, growing up, I grew up with the idea that you're supposed to have a prophet and that's supposed to lead your church. And if you don't have a prophet, then you don't have any truth at all anywhere, basically. And so when this is one of the things that I really appreciated about my master's program, was really digging into these kinds of things and learning more about exactly what a prophet is, because my ideas were very wrong just growing up. I had corrected them in some ways when I was an adult, but being a prophet is not something that you tend to really focus on in a Sunday sermon when you're going to your average non-denominational Christian church. So I didn't have really a whole lot of exposure to what a prophet really was. And oh, look, they actually had false prophets who really did true prophecy. And what do you do with that?
Right.
Yeah. So I think that's a lot of what this Jeremiah passage talks about.
Yeah, in Jeremiah 23, verses 21 through 23, and I'm going to read it, Carey, and you just sound off on anything that sounds interesting to you. God is speaking, and he says, I did not send prophets, yet they ran. I did not speak to them, and yet they prophesied. But if they had stood in my counsel, then they would have proclaimed my words to my people, and they would have turned from their evil way and from the evil of their deeds. And so that seems to me to be connecting the office of prophet to the divine counsel in some ways. Do you read it that way?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yes, because I think this connects to that ancient Jewish idea or Israelite idea or Second Temple idea, wherever it came from, of the idea that there is this, like the Sanhedrin is supposed to mirror the heavenly council. So if you are a true prophet, you are literally standing in that council in a real on-the-boots earthly way.
Yeah.
And like earlier in that chapter, it says, do not listen to the words of the prophets who prophesy to you, filling you with vain hopes. They speak visions of their own minds, not from the mouth of the Lord. And yet sometimes those things come to pass. They're either just promising good things to the people they're talking to. Oh, this is what you want to hear, and I want to get paid by you, so I'll tell you what you want to hear.
Right.
Or they actually are getting some false information, and like there's no way for you to tell unless you have like the truth to compare that to, right? And so that's part of how you see whether somebody who's claiming to be a prophet is truly a prophet. Are they speaking God's word? Because we have God's word. We have that to measure it against.
And so the idea of a prophet in that instance isn't just someone who has supernatural information to pass on, because
not necessarily.
Yeah,
right?
that could just as easily be a necromancer or a priestess of or a priest of just about anything. There are beings out there who would like to communicate. It could also be somebody who's just really into reading what's going on and they can accurately predict things. But there is an office of prophet that here seems to be almost like an ambassador of the divine court to the earthly court. And it's their job to say, hey, this is what's going on, and I'm going to tell you. And Samuel has already told Saul, that he's going to be losing the kingdom, that he has offended the Lord by sparing the Amalekites and all sorts of ridiculous things that he's been up to. And so none of this information should be new to Saul, except it is. And so he just refuses to believe bad news, I guess. He's the eternal optimist, I suppose. But he has come to a witch, to the lady of the pit, or a woman who serves the lady of the pit. And Emily Dixon in Faith and Other Oddities does a really great job when she's teaching through the Samuel books of walking through this. And so I would encourage you to check out the Raven Creek Social Club there, the Faith and Other Oddities, if you want a more detailed look at that. But pretty much it involved digging a hole in the ground, a pit, a grave, and pouring out a sacrifice in the hopes of feeding or empowering some being from the other world, from the grave, to come and pass on information to her. And she seems to have made a living doing this. You think this is her first rodeo? This is the first time she's done this?
Oh, definitely not. Yeah.
Yeah,
she's experienced. Everybody knows, and
she doesn't seem to have been like, because I was taught this. I don't know where I got this from, but I was always taught that she is shocked that it works. And I read through this, and I don't know where I got that from. I think somebody
she is surprised.
said it. Yeah, but she's surprised that it's Samuel. and that it's
Right. Not
Saul, she's really
necessarily
not
that it was.
surprised that a spirit is there. And
Mhm.
if it was me, I would be surprised that a spirit was there. That would be the shocking thing, and not the
Right.
identity of my client. I don't know. I just think I
Mhm.
was reading this really wrong until I stopped and really opened my mind up to the reality of the supernatural world around me. And I was so fast to try to close those windows that I kind of missed the
Mm.
point of what this text was about. And so,
Mhm.
do you
Yeah.
mind if we start in verse 6? Just jumping
Yeah,
down there
that'd be
into
great.
the text, it says, and when Samuel inquired of the Lord did not answer him, either by dreams or by the Urim or by the prophets. So I guess there were some prophets around, and the Urim, I suppose, isn't working. Do you think that has any connection
Yeah.
to him having killed all the priests in Nob?
Possibly. But there's also, I mean, there's a question of did he even have it? Because who was it? Abiathar took the ephod to David
Right.
in chapter 23. So it's like, well, did he even have it? But maybe he did. And maybe he tried it before that happened or whatever. But it's like there's these three different things that is given that he has tried. And I think that if you wanted to rabbit trail into some of that.
Yeah, go ahead.
So if you're just reading this, you're thinking, oh, he's expecting that I'll just have dreams like God will just give them to me. But it's quite likely that he was seeking the dreams out by doing something. Like in the ancient world, they could go into sacred places, they could sleep in certain places in the hopes of getting dreams from the powers that had control over that area in some sense.
So you think
so
this
he
is
was
part of
probably trying
a
to do
pattern
that.
that he's been doing?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well,
Yeah,
that makes
right.
it worse.
Mm-hmm. Because this is like the fourth, the going to the witch is the fourth thing he's tried. So he's probably tried this kind of dreaming. He's probably tried the Urim and then going to the prophets, and who knows what prophets he's even talking about, because these don't have to be God's prophets that he's referencing necessarily.
Mm.
Because there were prophets for like a dime a dozen. You could
like
buy one
a
if
holy
you wanted,
man of
right?
some kind.
Yeah. And then, of course, there's a whole bunch of ideas of what the Urim was, even. And
we kind of bounced over that. I should have written that down. Explain what that is, because not everyone who listens
oh, yeah,
to.
because we can do that.
Yeah, well, I mean, we can at least give them an idea. But in the
Right.
Bible, there is this. Not everyone who listens to our podcast has been going to church for a long time, and so sometimes we throw
Right.
out Jesus-y words that
Mm-hmm.
they just don't understand. But the
Well,
Urim,
and your average Christian isn't even going to understand this one.
no. Well, why don't you talk just a little bit about that, if you don't mind?
Okay, so it's a form of divination, basically. We at least know that much, even if we don't know exactly what it looked like or what it did precisely. Growing up, actually, I grew up with this idea of the Urim and Thummim being like these special glasses that Joseph Smith put on, and that's how he translated the Book of Mormon. So that's how I grew up with it. But then I go to read anything in the Bible, and it's like, these are definitely not glasses. They don't have anything to do with translating. So anyway, what it definitely is in the Bible is a form of divination. And normally we think of divination as being a bad thing, like you're not supposed to do that kind of thing. But apparently certain forms were used by the priests because the Urim was attached or put in, we don't know which, in the ephod, which was the breastplate of the high priest.
Right.
So the Urim is either, like the common idea is that they were either bone chips or stones that had two sides to them that were marked on two sides. So it was like a two-sided dice, basically.
Well,
but there's
and that makes sense
better,
too, because
yeah.
I mean, we're not really told a ton about it. We're just told that it was there. And
Right.
like you said, that it moved, but there are multiple theories about this, and that's what she's getting ready to talk here a little bit about.
Right. So you have the idea that there's two-sided dice, but there's also maybe much better ideas that it's polyhedric dice. So like it's an actual dice that we would think of, who knows how many sides, but they would have letters on them. So it would actually spell out words when you rolled them. So that's another idea. But I think it's in Josephus and in the Dead Sea Scrolls, both of them talk about these stones, that they emitted light, like they shone when God's presence was around.
Wow. That would be kind of freaky.
Yeah.
It was a definite means of godly communication, though. It wasn't something definitely. That was off the beaten path or connected to...
This wasn't something they said, let me try to control God by this.
Right.
This was something that God instituted to allow them to know a little bit more about what he was revealing to them.
And we kind of get a glimpse of a similar activity in the New Testament when the disciples are trying to replace Judas. They cast lots. And it doesn't seem that they were just making that up. It's like, you know what, let's draw straws here. And whoever comes up with the short straw, you're the new guy. Mm-hmm. Like, where did they get that idea from? And there are just so many little things in the Bible that I want more. I want more details. I would like just an appendix. Have you read Lord of the Rings? Do you ever read Lord of the Rings? Yeah. Like,
definitely.
Before like you even get into like the Bible or the book, it's like more about hobbits. That's what I want in the Bible. And it's I guess I have to buy, other people's books and things to get that, but it would be nice if the Lord had. When I get to heaven, what I'm saying is I have a long list of things that I'm investigating real fast.
Oh, yeah. Long list.
And that one's on there. But if there were glowing dice, I'm definitely intrigued by that. But this isn't Saul being evil or, trying to seek some form of inappropriate means of communicating with God necessarily. Yet. We know
necessarily.
We know that God has spoken by dreams. And we know that God has spoken by the Urim and the Thummim. And we also know that Saul is not to be trusted. And if one source dries up, he's more than willing to side with someone else. And so that thought there about him going into caves or into other sacred places and trying to do this on his own through his own supernatural power or through his office as a king, I'd not considered that before, but now I'm intrigued by it. And I definitely, he's just a shady character, isn't he?
Oh, all the way. Yeah.
Verse 7 says, Saul said to his servants, and I guess this would be Saul's court, seek out for me a woman who is a medium, a witch, a necromancer, that I may go to her and inquire of her. And his servants don't say, well, we're not sure where there are any. They don't seem to be concerned about this at all. They pipe right up and they say, behold, there is a medium at a place called Endor. And so Saul disguised himself and he put on other garments, and he and the two men with him, and they came to the woman by night. And he said, divine for me a spirit and bring up for me whoever I shall name to you. You think there's anything that we're supposed to connect with Saul disguising himself?
Yes, that is actually one of the things I was thinking about, because later on when Samuel does show up, how do they know it's Samuel?
Well, that's a good question. We're going to get to that. Do you have a thought that you want to drop here?
Yes, because when she describes him, she says he's an old man with a robe. Well, surely there's a lot of old men with robes around, right? Unless it's a special robe, unless he can be identified by the robe.
I always get the vibe from Samuel that he was really grouchy, kind of this wild man of the mountains kind of thing. But I'm from West Virginia, so they could just see who he was because he's the only one with the wild hair and being like kind of a John the Baptist type character, like, oh, that man. Maybe it's just because I look like a bear, as Josh Sherman keeps telling me, and I'm just trying to read that in there. But he's recognizable as who he is, and the garment, the hooded cloak, like all of that kind of adds to the creepy factor of this story. You know,
Oh yeah, definitely.
Saul has, here he is at night, he's in disguise, and to me, it has connections back to the Adam and Eve stuff that's taking place in Eden, where they hide themselves from God, where there is this deception going on. This woman's not supposed to be doing what she's doing here, and Saul isn't supposed to be doing what he's doing here. And here he is, he's trying to connect with the court of the Lord. It just seems like he didn't think this through very well.
Or maybe he thought it through too much.
Oh, yeah. Now we're talking. So anyway, he is there, and he says, "Bring me up a spirit." And the woman says to him, this is verse 9, "Surely you know what Saul has done, how he has cut off the mediums and the necromancers from the land. Why then are you laying a trap for my life to bring about my death?" And Saul swore to her by the Lord, "As the Lord lives, no punishment shall come upon you for this thing." And then the woman said, "Who shall I bring up for you?" And he says, "Bring up Samuel for me." Do you think that she knew which Samuel this was?
Yeah, definitely.
She's not just like calling out for a random Samuel.
Like, "Hey, Samuel, hello.
Yeah, so he's like Oprah or somebody who's known by like their first name.
Yeah, I mean, Samuel had to have been a pretty famous figure in the land.
Yeah, I think so. And kind of her arch nemesis, if you think about it. Like, she's a representative of the court of darkness. And her information is coming from the enemies of the Lord. And here this man has walked the length and breadth of the land for years as the voice of the council, as the Lord's word on just about anything that needed to be said. And so I think this is for sure that she knows who this is. And
yeah,
I kind of think she knows who Saul is here a little bit as well. Like, how many people are going to be asking for Samuel?
And she just she might have just trusted anybody swearing by the Lord, but maybe not. I don't know.
That's interesting. You know, kind of to say, well, that's a God who doesn't lie. And so that's an oath that has real weight to it. And so what she says is, when she saw Samuel, she cries out with a loud voice. And the woman said to Saul, "Why have you deceived me? You are Saul." And the king said to her, "Do not be afraid. What do you see?" And the woman said to Saul, "I see a God coming up out of the earth." What do you think about that?
That's super dramatic, isn't it?
Well, I think so.
Yeah, and
if it was
really
boring,
odd.
We wouldn't talk about it. It's the weird and wonderful corners of the Bible. That's what we're after.
Definitely. It's interesting. Samuel shows up, and then she turns to Saul and goes, "Hey, you're Saul." And then it's only after this that he's addressed as the king as well in the text. That's interesting.
So the woman sees him, but Saul doesn't seem to be able to see him. Does that make sense to you?
I'm not sure. Maybe not.
So,
not at this point. Like, he's not. Samuel hasn't. Yeah, you're right. It does seem like right at this moment.
Says, "Who shall I bring up for you?" See. And the woman saw Samuel, and she cries out with a loud voice, "Why have you deceived me? You are Saul." And the king says to her, "Don't be afraid. What do you see?" And the woman said to her, "I see a God coming up out of the earth." Well, I guess before we get into that, what do you think she means when she says a God? Now, that phrase has a lot of baggage in English, and this is probably a good place to kind of talk about the word Elohim here.
I forget, have you even addressed that very much in your
We've been kind of dripping it in, not a whole lot, no.
Okay, so this is a problematic word in a way, because when we have the word God in English, we think of all kinds of ideas that are associated with the word God, right? We think of a being who's all powerful, or at least mostly powerful, and who can do all of these things, who has a whole bunch of attributes associated with the word God, with a being who's described as God.
Right.
But when you're translating from a different language, especially an ancient language, you're not getting that one-to-one correspondence of the ideas. So the word used here doesn't have all of the associations that we now have with the word God.
Mm.
But it's maybe the best word they could use. I don't know. They're trying to be consistent in translating. I don't know, because the word Elohim is usually used for God, the creator, the sovereign, our sovereign Lord. But the problem is, a lot of times God is referred to in ways that can also be used for other lesser beings.
Right.
So that's the problem we have here.
So in English, we have a really nice cheat for this, and it's a capital letter. You know, if I'm writing and I have the capital letter G, I'm talking about the God of the Bible. And if I use the lowercase g, I could be talking about anything. And the word here, Elohim, really is a place and not necessarily a person. It's saying this is a spirit, a spiritual being. And we know this is just the way that they talked. You know, they didn't have this. This is a polytheistic culture, just is. As a Christian, I think there really is only one God with a capital G. He is the creator. Definitely. He is the beginner of all things, and everything that exists came from him and his power. But some of the things that he made are spirits. And the word that would describe those is the word that's used here. And so when she says, I see a God coming up out of the earth, she doesn't say, you know, I'm seeing the Lord, creator of all things. She's saying, there's a spirit in the pit, and it's cloaked, and
she's not hooded. Even necessarily she's not even necessarily saying that she sees like a territorial God, like a national God or anything like that.
And if she's used the word to Elohim, talking to like a specific spirit, a familiar, it's not this guy. This is not who's used to visiting her, and I think that's part of what frightens her. If you talk to people who are into contacting spirits and that sort of thing, and I've spent quite a bit of time just because I'm interested, but they'll talk about a spirit guide or a familiar spirit. It isn't just a random assortment all the time, but this is definitely someone that she recognizes, and it is not who she was expecting to come up out of the pit, crawling up out of the earth. And it frightens her. And I don't think it frightens her because there's a spirit. I think it frightens her because she realizes this is dangerous. This is the enemy, and he should not be here. Of all of the people who shouldn't have come to a witch's response, it should be Samuel. Like, I think that in her mind she recognizes, like, oh my goodness, this is bad. This is real bad. And if Samuel can get to me, who else can? Who else is out there? Is this the judgment of God coming up on me? Is Samuel going to drag me down into the hole? Kind of a thing. And she is frightened here, but I don't think for the reasons that I thought growing up. I think she's afraid and because of that.
Yeah, I agree. Because some people will say, oh, well, maybe that's not really Samuel. Maybe it's really a demon or whatever. But why would she be so upset in that case? And why is she accusing Saul of deceiving her?
Right.
If it wasn't actually Samuel.
If you want this to be a demon, you have to bring it into the text with you. The text itself doesn't say that. It doesn't imply that. It doesn't say, and she said it was Samuel, but we all know that, you know, it can't really be Samuel because of this, and the other. And the authors are perfectly willing to launch into parentheses whenever they feel like it. They've done that quite a few times. This would be a good place for that to happen if that's what was happening. But instead, it's not. It really seems to be the spirit of Samuel. And he's wrapped in a cloak, and he's coming up out of this pit. And Saul says to her in verse 14, and he says to her, what is his appearance? And she said, an old man is coming up, and he is wrapped in a robe. That's creepy. And again, it seems that he can't tell what is happening. Saul may have been God's anointed. He may have been, the main dude for a long, long time. But by this point, whatever spiritual connection or enlightenment that he had has failed him. The Lord is leaving him blind here. And he is saying, he's having to ask this witch, what do you see? And she begins to talk to him. And Saul knew that it was Samuel, and he hits the dirt. He bowed his face to the ground and paid homage. Does that seem like something he shouldn't be doing?
Well, maybe, but I think that maybe we put too much credit into that kind of language. Like, what he's doing is worship. Like, we think of that as you only do that to God, right? Or towards God. And I think maybe that's really not culturally the case at the time. That this is just the way he's acknowledging Samuel and trying to give him honor, probably because this is Saul, probably because he wants something out of him, and not because he necessarily is really all that caring about giving Samuel the honor that he would deserve. But I think this is more a cultural thing and not he's actually worshiping Samuel like a deity. I don't think that's necessarily the case.
Right. And I was going to point that out because the word that's used here is homage, yastasu. And it's this idea of a lesser person in the court paying homage to a higher ranking official. Right. It doesn't always, but to an American, we don't bow a whole lot for prayer, and that's about it. Like that's our use of that word. But it's here. It's given in the sense that this may be about the first nice, good thing that Saul has done in quite a while, is to acknowledge that you outrank me, and even though I'm supposedly the king here, I am acknowledging you and trying to give you honor. And it just smells like manipulation to me, even though he's going through he's doing it in a right way. I think he has a bad intent. And I think there's a lot of application ways you can run with that. Just, it isn't necessary. Are you familiar with a guy called A.W. Tozer?
Yeah.
He's a famous preacher, but he had this great line, and just to sum it up, he said, an action does not rise higher than its motives. And that has always just fascinated me. You can do good things, and it's not enough. It isn't that God's up there, keeping score. How many good deeds did you do, and how many did you do? If the heart is not seeking to honor God or to pursue goodness, God is not deceived. He is well aware of what we're up to. And here what Saul is doing is he's not trying to be loyal to the Lord. He's trying to make things go his way. He's not eating from the tree of life. He's eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And I just feel bad for Saul. I know I'm not supposed to, but I kind of feel like he's, at this point, he's a mess. Like, as tall and as powerful as he is, he just feels very childish here to me.
Yeah. I mean, he can't have good motives all of a sudden.
All of a sudden. No, I like that.
Yeah. He's been so self-serving this whole time, and he's just afraid, and he wants something here. And now Samuel's actually appeared. He's probably afraid. And now he's like, well, maybe I'll actually get out of Samuel what I wanted to do. So, hey, I'm going to fall on the ground in front of him because I want something from him.
So verse 16 says, and Samuel said, why then do you ask me, since the Lord has turned from you and become your enemy? I think that may be the scariest verse in this whole thing, that God is now his foe. Yeah. And the idea of, like, you thought you were fighting the Philistines. No. You're fighting God. And the Lord will bring about your destruction. The Lord has done to you as he spoke by me. For the Lord has torn the kingdom out of your hand and given it to your neighbor David, because you did not obey the voice of the Lord and did not carry out his fierce wrath against Amalek. Therefore the Lord has done this thing to you. Moreover, the Lord will give Israel also with you into the hand of the Philistines tomorrow, and you and your sons shall be with me. The Lord will give the army of Israel also into the hand of the Philistines. What jumps out to you as important in that part?
Oh, there's a lot of things there. I mean, there's the history with what Saul did and what he didn't do. There's the idea of God has been really patient with Saul for a long time, honestly. But Saul is just like, I don't really care. I'm just only in it for myself. I'm only here because I'm terrified. I'm terrified of these earthly enemies that I have forgotten the God who can really destroy me in a way that nothing else should come close to that kind of a fear. But he didn't have fear of God. He had fear of the enemies around him, and probably fear of just losing his place, even though he was already told he was going to lose it. But I feel like he probably had such an ego that he's like, well, maybe if I beat these Philistines, I'll just keep being king all the time.
Right.
That's all I need to do. I
can do this myself. I can hold on to power myself. I can do this even my own way. And it really does seem to go back to the way that Saul treated the Amalekites. And you have to go back earlier in the book of Samuel to find out their story. But that's a really interesting phrase. The Amalekites aren't just any old Canaanite people. They're actually kind of cousins of the Israelites. They're descendants of Esau. And they're connected to the giant clans. And I think that I went back and I listened to Michael Heiser's Naked Bible podcast about when he taught through the book of Exodus, and he talks about the Amalekites when they attack Israel on their way to Mount Sinai. And I didn't connect that in my mind. Sometimes when you're reading all these ites and Hittites and Jebusites and things, they all kind of run together in my mind. But these names really were common and understood by everybody, and their background was known by Saul. And these are people who are also connected to the giants, just like the Philistines seem to be. And so God really took this seriously. This wasn't just any old people, but he was given a task and he refused to do it. And the Amalekites are connected to the Horites, the Rephaim. But really what it came down to is God made it very clear what Saul was supposed to do. And he kind of did it. He did part of it and then made up the rest of the rules himself. And then he lies about it to Samuel.
Yeah.
And
he said, well, I killed most of them, but I just kept their good stuff. What's wrong with that?
I like that he says, and I've kept these as an offering to the Lord.
Right.
I think that's terrible. Well, I only stole this and I was going to offer it to the Lord, suddenly like this is really a good thing. And here's the spin that I need to make this right. And how many times do Christians do that exact same thing? Like, we know what God is asking us to do, but we have reasons why our idea is better. Or God may want me to forgive that person, but here's 5 reasons why I should not. I'm going to do it my way instead of his way. And I can't, and I know this is the name of our podcast, but it goes back in my mind to the 2 trees. We choose to obey, or we choose to define right and wrong for ourselves. And if ever there was a story where Saul is trying to define right and wrong for himself, it's right here. He hasn't changed at all.
The connection with the trees is so direct here. We have Saul who is going to lose his life because he was seeking this knowledge that God was trying to tell him all along. You're not getting this knowledge. Just stop it. And he's like, no, I'm going to keep going after it and going after it, trying all of these different ways to get it. And he ends up with death, just like Adam and Eve.
Mm. That's rough. And and it's on a high place, just in case you guys, weren't sure of this enough. It's on Mount Gilboa, which again is right by that Philistine city, Beth-shan. And Saul is I know he kind of gets a bad rap, but I keep seeing my own mistakes in Saul. Like, here's a guy who he's on team, the Lord. Like, and I think I am. I know I am. But then when I look at my sins, and I got to realize, like, I keep confessing the same sins. Like, we have a habit at our church of we take communion pretty often. And when I'm holding the bread and I'm ready to drink the wine and I'm confessing my sins, you could just about record my prayer from last month and replay it. And I look at that and I can explain that away from myself, but that's kind of what Saul is doing here, and it matters. God is asking for holiness from his people, and especially for leadership. And so I think that for me as a pastor, I have a lot to learn here. And I know the Lord is patient and loving and all those things, and God has been patient and loving with Saul. But there also comes a point where the judgment of God is real, and Saul's about to reap what he's been sowing. Do you think, how much should we read into the giant connection here with the Amalekites? Do you think that that's something worth digging into, or should we push past that?
Oh, definitely. No, I think you should really dig into that.
Yeah, I think so too. And it's a list of those long. I really would recommend Dr. Heiser's Exodus story here. I can't remember which episode it was. I really should have written it down. But they attack Israel at a place called Rephaim. And that's not an accident. It's connected to those giant clans, the Rephaim that not Jesus, but although Jesus is against the Rephaim as well, but Joshua is so eager to conquer. And Saul is kind of given the opportunity to finish that battle. And he decides to run that his own way. And the spiritual warfare that is taking place around Saul at this time, I think, has to be big. What had happened in the supernatural world as well as in the physical world? Because Saul is playing with dangerous game here. He's inviting spirits. He's talking to mediums. He's looking for any ally he can find at this point. And at the end, it ends in doom. The Lord says, hey, you're going to die. You're going to be overthrown. And I'm giving the kingdom to David. And none of this should surprise you.
Right. Yeah. So, and this is all of this is another reason why I think this is genuinely Samuel. This is genuinely from the Lord, because what happens is it actually happens. Like,
right.
This plays out.
So,
and when you talk about prophets versus false prophets, a prophet is going to be the one who's going to direct you to God.
Right.
And that's what's happening here. It's talking about God's real judgment. It's talking about what God actually wanted him to do, what's God's purposes.
And it isn't always a call to repent. Sometimes it's just a proclamation. This is what's happening. Jeremiah, I know we quoted him earlier, but Jeremiah's message to Israel was, the judgment is here. You're going to go into exile. This is what I want you to do while you're in exile. And the prophet said, no. God would never abandon the temple. God could never allow his temple to fall into pagan hands. And, we call Jeremiah the weeping prophet because he doesn't have much in the way of good news. And here we get the same thing. Samuel, who is still a prophet, he's even though he's died, he is sent to deliver a message. And I think the more I've thought about like what a prophet is, that just seems to me I feel like there's something there. And so if any of our listeners out there want to chew on that and drop your thoughts here, I'm curious, and I'd like to hear from you guys what your studies are bringing up and what you guys are thinking here as well. But what I don't see in this text is a rogue spirit. I
Right.
don't see a human body or a human soul who's been wandering, and God forgot him down here, and he's just blowing with the wind. What I see here is someone who's been sent by God to say something to Saul.
Mm-hmm.
And how did it happen? I don't know. Why did it happen? I don't know that either. I know almost nothing about what's happening in this story, except that it did happen. And I'd like to know more of the background, but it just isn't given to us. And so rather than saying, hey, ghosts aren't real, there's no such thing as ghosts, I think we would be better served to read this story and say, what does the Bible say is happening here? And then agree with that. Does that make any sense to you? If you told me no, I would take the rebuke and go a different direction.
No, I definitely think that's the right trajectory. And this is why looking at the Bible in context, sometimes we think that that's disconnected from our day-to-day lives, like it's disconnected from application. No, it is directly, it feeds right into our application, but what we need to do is dig into the meaning and purposes and what it's actually saying, in not on a surface level of these are the words, but what is the overall meaning and message of the text.
Right.
And that speaks always directly into our lives. That applies always in some way.
When I read Saul, it's easy to cast stones and to say, boy, I'm glad I'm not like that guy. But I am like that guy. I'm like every sinner who's ever sinned, we think that no one's ever borne our troubles, and that's just not the case. It comes down, though, to am I willing to allow God to be king, or am I setting myself up as a rival power? Because if that's what you're doing, if you're trying to control your life, then you're going to fight against the Lord, and that rock doesn't move. He is an unstoppable power. Nothing is able to challenge him. And even Saul, with all of his power and all of his height and all of his money and all of his wealth and respect and all the things that made him one of the chief warlords of the region, was left defenseless when God said, that's enough. This is what's happening. And the more you read about this, well, let's just finish this. We're over our time. I don't care. We're going to keep going if that's okay with you. It says in verse 20, Saul fell at once full length on the ground and was filled with fear because of the words of Samuel. And there was no strength in him because he had eaten nothing all day and all night. And the woman came to Saul, and when she saw that he was terrified, she said to him, behold, your servant has obeyed you. I have taken my life in my hand and have listened to what you have said to me. Now, therefore, you also obey your servant. Let me set a morsel of bread before you and eat, that you may have strength when you go your way. But he refused and said, I will not eat, which, by the way, is a typical Saul thing to say, if you've read the rest of his story. But his servants together with the woman urged him, and he listened to their words, and he arose from the earth and sat on the bed. Now the woman had a fatted calf in the house, and she quickly killed it and took flour and kneaded it and baked unleavened bread of it, and she put it before Saul and his servants, and they ate. And they rose and went away that night. So that's the ending of the story there, Carey. What do you take away from how this wraps up?
Well, there are so many themes in here that should be just chiming in on people's heads when they're reading this. The idea of the offering of the food from the woman to Saul, that could be a whole new different podcast episode, I think.
And I think it probably will be, because it doesn't just say she gave him food. Look at the type of food that is offered here, and ask yourself, where have I heard those before? And so I think I'm tracking with you here. Keep going.
Yeah, and why is she so insistent on doing this for him? She's not like, oh, I feel bad for you. No, she has motives here.
I think.
And not really good ones because of who she is.
Yeah, and she's really asking him, obey me. Listen to my advice.
Yeah.
she seems almost like a snake at this point.
Yeah.
Man, there's just so much here. And then he arises from the earth and sits on the bed.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how much more comfortable can you be? Like he's at home with this woman. And I think there's some weird stuff going on here. So let me encourage you guys. And we'll end with a challenge, Where do you see unleavened bread, the fattened calf, that kind of a thing? What could be going on here? And where does your imagination take you back in the story? How do you see these connecting? And I think that's part of the fun of this. And realize that, I'm not saying make stuff up, but I am saying look up those words and read those stories and then reread this and see how does this flavor your understanding of what's happening. But my friends, in the end, no power on earth was able to save Saul because the Lord was against him. The Lord is unbeatable, and he is so patient and so kind, even to those who have wandered away, like you and me, that even though we have sinned, he has given us an advocate with the Father. Jesus Christ pleads for us. He has forgiven our sins, and if only we are willing to accept his forgiveness, it's given. And so if you're a sinner, and you are, apologize. Tell him you're sorry. God knows you're a sinner. You can hide it, but it doesn't actually hide anything. Any more than Adam and Eve hid in the garden and they were hidden from God. It doesn't work. The Lord knows exactly who you are, and he's offering to you salvation. He's offering to you himself. He loves you so much that he died on the cross to forgive you your sins and to cleanse you of all unrighteousness. And so, my friend, if you've got questions about this and you'd like to know more about Jesus, I would love to talk with you. If you're interested in this, hey, keep listening to this podcast or check out Genesis Marks the Spot. But my friend Carey, we're going to sign off here if that's okay with you.
Yep. Thanks again for having me on.
Carey, I'm going to play the music, but don't go away. We are going to chat afterwards. But my friends, thanks for listening to another episode of the Two Trees Podcast.